Welcome to the Local Candidates Forum, sponsored by the Moore County Republican Party in conjunction with the Moore County Republican Men's Club, Moore Republican Women, and Moore T Citizens. To start the forum, each of the speakers will receive 2 minutes to make an opening statement. We'll start with Nick Paserno, Chairman of the Board of County Commissioners, and then we'll just basically go left to right, left to right, left to right. At the conclusion of the forum, we will have 2 minutes for closing statements, and we'll go in reverse order. If a question that we have up here at the table is directed to a particular speaker or candidate, that candidate will receive 2 minutes to answer. Their opponent will receive a 1 minute rebuttal. There's no sir rebuttal, no sir rebuttal, no interjections will cut you off. You may use your time in the next question to rebut if you like, but you won't get extra time. And we have the lovely and talented Miriam Chu as our timekeeper. When your time goes off, she will shine a flashlight in your face. Matthew Hebb of the Connect NC Committee will address the bond issue, the Connect NC bond, which will be on the ballot again in the March primary. Mr. Hebb, 2 minutes.
And there it goes green. My name is Matthew Hebb, and I'm with the Connect NC Committee. I'm here to talk to you folks about the $2 billion bond that you'll see on the ballot March 15th. One of the biggest things that I'm hoping to do this evening is at the very least serve to inform you about the bond and its existence, because many voters do not even know it's on the ballot. Now, you folks are here, so chances are that you are more likely than not aware of it, but I'm going to try and give you some information about it. As an overall, it gives money to the community colleges, the universities, the National Guard and Public Safety, agriculture, as well as the state parks and the zoo. It does all of those things with no tax increase required, and that is one of the great benefits of it. It is supported by the governor, the lieutenant governor, Phil Berger, as well as a vast majority of the Republicans in the state house, and it has bipartisan support. For those of you who may not be a Republican, there's also support from the other side. I hope I'm able to give you guys good information regarding it. And here in Moore County, for whatever it's worth, there is some great benefits. There's actually $8.5 million for the Samarkand Training Academy, as well as money for Sand Hills Community College, and for your local state park. So, I don't want to get a flashlight.
Thank you, sir. Representing North Carolina against the bond, Nicole Rebels, 2 minutes.
Yes, I am Nicole Rebels with NC against the bond, and I will be voting against the March 15 referendum measure that Mr. Hebb was just referencing. I believe, well, first of all, a bond, to make sure that we're clear on terms, a bond is not free money, it's not a grant. You're talking about adopting a line of credit, in other words, taking on a debt and leaving that debt to future generations to have to pay off. Another term for that is deferred taxation. It's a way for legislators to spend lots of money right now, $2 billion plus interest over the next 20 years, and not have to account for it as a spending increase in their operating budgets, leaving that debt to future generations. Mr. Hebb just stated that no tax increase is required. I consider that claim to be an empty campaign promise. There is no guarantee anywhere that no tax increases will be required in order to pay off this debt, and it is more likely that there will be a tax increase required, and in fact, North Carolina's own history demonstrates to us that there will be a tax increase if this bond passes. That is exactly what happened the last time North Carolina adopted a general obligation bond for these very same purposes in the year 2000 for university system infrastructure. In other words, buildings at the university system. That is the majority of the funding of this bond. That's where it's going. And I have a report, a hindsight analysis from the last time that a bond was adopted in North Carolina that demonstrates that the exact same promises were made, that it would not require a tax increase, and in 2001 there was a direct tax increase. Thank you.
Thank you all candidates for your opening statements. Again, audience members, if you have questions for any of the speakers, please submit them on a note card and we'll be glad to ask them. We have a bunch up here already, so if we don't get to everything, we encourage you to contact these candidates, these speakers,
and ask your questions, and hopefully you will get answers. Let's go with the bond issue, starting with Mr. Hibb. This question is directed to you. Do you know what specific items, such as proposed repairs and construction, that the community colleges are planning on constructing if the bond passes? And what was the formula used to determine how much money was allocated to each? 2 minutes.
There we go. Yes, absolutely. In fact, before I came here, I wanted to reach out. Each community college determines what their needs were, and then they put in contracts just like they would for any other spending. I did reach out to Sand Hills Community College to ask them what the projects they were going to be funding locally were, and they have those outlined. In fact, they are ready to go, essentially, if this bond should pass. And one of them is upgrades to the nursing and medical school at the local community college, as well as there are some upgrades that are necessary for your local auditorium. Now, each community college is different, and each community should reach out to their respective community colleges. It's up to their local board in which to do those different projects. There are several different levels to which that were used for determining what money goes where. One of them was based on need, another was based on occupancy, and another one, there was a formula that was done, and that is why each community got the amount that they did. I would point out that all 58 community colleges in the state of North Carolina do get benefits from the bond. And these bonds are, one of the points that was made a few moments ago, and I would like to address it at this point, is the tax increase. There is no tax increase. This was commissioned as a study from both Republicans and Democrats. The PAPACORI as well as the state treasurer both commissioned a study, both determined that there would be no tax increase required for the bond. This was also vetted with nonpartisan officials as well. So I would like to, refute that particular point and point out also too that each community college is getting their money based off of a calculated need formula. It was not arbitrary.
Thank you, Mr. Hibb. Ms. Rebels, 1 minute to respond.
I think it is very clear from what we just heard that when this bond bill was passed, there were no community college projects submitted. Mr. Hibb just stated that they were delegated funding based on need and occupancy, not based on necessity of individual projects. Now, in this list, the voting public, by the way, does not have information for each of those community college projects. The only thing that we are told, we the voters, who are the ones that are asked to pass this, is a line item and pages of community colleges listed here with the millions, however many millions of dollars in funding that they're going to receive from this bond, and a line item titled New Construction, Repairs, Renovations. The community colleges are not required to submit individual projects until after the bond is already passed. So we don't know what we are voting on. You may have details of your local plans that are not set in stone, but this isn't a local bill. You're being asked to pass a statewide referendum for millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars across the entire state, and yet we have no idea what those community college projects are. Now, regarding the tax increase, it's great that proponents of the bond say there won't be a tax increase, but that is not guaranteed anywhere. Legislators today, there is no way that they can make a guarantee over what future legislators are going to do when that bond debt comes up for payment. You're talking about over $100 million every single year in debt service for the next 20 years that our legislators are going to have to find a way to pay for. So there will be a tax increase. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaking of the bond issue, the question for the county commissioner candidates, we'll start with Mr. Shockey first, so each of you will get 2 minutes to respond. What is your stance on the Connect NC bond issue? How will it help or hurt the county? Mr. Shockey, 2 minutes.
I support the bond issue, and the reason is because the community college will benefit. I personally don't know the details. I'll let the advocates and the opponents argue on details, but our community college, as we know, with the linking of the Advanced Career Center, our Moore County Public School systems and our community college are inextricably linked. So we need to continue support of both of them going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quist. 2 minutes.
Thank you. I too support the bond. I believe we're very fortunate in Moore County to have Sand Hills Community College. And the people I know that are involved, and many of us know the leadership there and the board, are good stewards of the monies they're given. I know there are some programs that they're developing now, one involving training for machinists, and these are very good paying jobs. There's a need in Moore County for this skill level. I applaud the community college staff for their creativity in reaching out to industry here and responding to what industry asked of them. So I think there'll be some concrete benefits as a result of the extra monies they'll have to develop some of these programs. I've been on the campus, met with Professor Duncan, who's heading up the program, and I'm really excited about that. So I believe some of these monies would go to a facility because it's presently a metal building that needs to be improved. I'm optimistic, and also the Weymouth Woods Park is in need of some funds too, so I think that will be a good investment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Head, on the bond, what is the rate of interest? And what is the guarantee for repayment? Property tax, sales tax, something else? 2 minutes.
Absolutely. First, in regards to the interest rate, one of the reasons that the bond is being promoted right now is because interest rates are at record lows. That is one of the reasons that keeps the cost of this bond so low, and one of the reasons why there was such a short fuse between it being proposed and it being on the ballot. To that end, though, I do want to be forthright in explaining interest rates do vary, and while they are low, I could not give you an exact figure. Now, the studies that were done in regards to its effect on the budget were considering a range from best to worst case scenarios. So even with the worst case scenarios, we're still going to be talking about a fiscally disciplined, going forward. In terms of how these bonds are repaid, first of all, absolutely, a bond is not free money. It does have to be repaid. But we repay bonds currently. There was a bond taken in 2000. We've taken bonds historically in this state. We've done such a great job because we have a good legislature in this state. Now it's gotten even better. But as a result, we have a AAA bond rating, which gives us access to the best interest rates as a state. I would also like to add that the thing to remember is interest rates, while they vary, being low, can make it so that these projects, as they're going forward, inflation is going to cause an increase in the cost of these projects as time goes on. So if we can take advantage of low interest rates, figuring in the fact that the projects that are in this bond are essential, inflation is only going to make them worse if we don't pass the bond now. Your general revenue funds are going to be what repays this. There's already a portion of the budget that's outlined for debt service. We use it now. We pay hundreds of millions of dollars in debt service every year, as I recall. Nothing has changed about that, and all this is going to do is continue those payments forward. It's not going to be anything new under the sun. It's something the state has always done and has figured into its budget.
Thank you. Ms. Rebels, 1 minute response.
So the argument that we just heard from Mr. Head is that our state is paying off debt at such a good rate that we should just lump more debt onto it and continue that rate of debt service. I think we can do better than that. I think we should pay down our debt. The interest rate on a $2 billion, you're talking about at least millions every year, if not tens of millions. That's thrown away in interest when we should be prioritizing items of importance, paying for them during the budget process if they are truly important, so that legislators have the details on the projects that our tax dollars are being spent on, rather than allocating the funds right now and coming up with the details later.
Thank you. Next.
As far as the bond, there's something that this audience really needs to know. When we were talking with Sand Hills Community College 2 years ago, we sat in a room trying to figure out how to fund Sand Hills projects. They gave us a list of the projects that they needed to fund. The things that's coming up now in the bond were never lit. They didn't have those items on their list of things to do. What scares me about the bond is once you start getting additional money, you find projects. And so what happens when you find projects, all of a sudden you spend $2 billion plus the interest over 20 years, and all of a sudden you can't shift money to education because you got to pay the service on the debt. And the light shining on my face.
Question for Ms. Revels about the bond issue. Given the fact that all buildings ultimately need upkeep, why would now not be a good time to pass the bond, since financing is as low as it's been since the 60s, and our state has a AAA bond rating, meaning even better rates? Isn't it a question of pay now or pay later? 2 minutes.
Well, I think that a bond is not the way to go to fund these projects. The argument is made that this $2 billion bond and the projects within are so expensive that our state just doesn't have the money to take them on unless they take on a debt. And I would argue with that because $2 billion, the entirety of this bond, with all the pork barrel spending, is less than 10% of our state's annual operating budget. This argument that nothing can be cut, nothing can be reprioritized or looked at in order to fund important projects, I don't buy it. If these are so important, then our state legislators need to provide the funding. And in fact, last year, 2015 alone, we were told that we had a $445 million revenue surplus. If these are so urgent and so important, why can't some of them be funded through the surplus? Surplus funding alone as an avenue for funding infrastructure projects. Every single one of these bond projects could be funded fully within 5 years, rather than taking over 20 years to pay off debt, and in the meantime, millions and millions in interest. There are other avenues that our state could look at. I think that, well, I have a statement right here from A.J. Dowd, the former North Carolina Education Lottery Commissioner, who came out against the bond, and in his statement, he stated, "The portion of the bill that affects improvement of education concerns me. Having been lottery commissioner, I believe tighter fiscal oversight of the lottery can provide funds for capital improvement." His statement alone tells us that there's waste within the education lottery fund. And by the way, think about the education lottery or the gas tax, money that there was leeway for it to be reallocated toward other projects. And do you really trust that that's not going to happen with this bond? There is a provision within the bond that actually says that they can reallocate it after the bond is passed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hill, response?
There's a lot to respond to there, but I'll do my best. First, I would like to point out that reallocation is put into the bond for a reason. If the community college that you're talking about wants to buy a piece of property to build a building across the street, and the seller should change their mind, they have to be able to reallocate. There are 2 tiers of required checks and balances on that, both including at the state and the local level. If it is in fact only 10% of our state's annual operating budget, we're able to take it at good interest rates, then why is it being considered such a massive amount of money and at the same time being considered such a small amount of money? The fact of the matter is that this is the way that the state funds large-scale infrastructural projects. This has been done for many, many years in the past. The reason that the state legislature sees the need to borrow this money through bonds is because of the low interest rates. It allows those extra funds to be freed up for things like tax decreases, which they've been doing a very good job of in the past. If we're able to use intelligent financing in our state, we're able to continue to do the things that the state has been doing, which is being fiscally responsible, cutting your taxes over and over again, which has been talked about by other candidates here. I would argue that pork barrel spending, as a last point, pork barrel spending by definition is pet projects by local legislators. I would argue that if you look at this bond, there are projects in 79 specific counties and benefits to all 100 counties in North Carolina, including more. Pork barrel spending is something that is specific to a specific district to pay someone off. This is spread out throughout the state, unlike many other pieces of legislation that have come through the state of North Carolina, especially under the Democrats for many, many years. We actually have an opportunity now to spend money on the entire state of North Carolina through this bond. And I would argue that Debt financing is a smart way to do business if you know what you're doing, and I think our legislature and our governor have demonstrated that with this bond.
Thank you. Next question for Mr. Zumwalt, 2 minutes, and then Mr. Bowles, a 1-minute response. Mr. Zumwalt, you have said North Carolina has got to start paying teachers a salary that is comparable to the rest of the nation. Okay, put a number on it. How much, and how would you pay for it? 2 minutes.
All right. Let me tell you how we're not going to pay the salaries. We're not going to pay them by borrowing money. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. And to say that we have hundreds of millions of dollars that we spend every year for debt service, let's get rid of that and start using that for teacher salaries. How are we going to pay teachers? Ladies and gentlemen, there is an enormous amount of money that you already pay. And what we're doing wrong is, I can say it in one word, priority. We are not prioritizing our money correctly. Just the very fact that we would even consider borrowing more money for these pet projects, and they are pet projects, and just the very fact that Mr. Hebb, who's a wonderful fellow, I'm sure, but he's being paid to be here tonight, to try to talk us into this bond. Now, you may not know how I feel about it by now, but I'm not for it. He made the statement that it's risky to use borrowed money, but not if you know what you're doing. Does anyone believe that the legislature knows what they're doing? Or we wouldn't be in this mess in the first place?
Next question for Mr. Hebb. Mr. Hebb, how much is the state spending to promote the Connect NC bond?
Nothing.
Ms. Rebels, 1-minute response.
Well, I would counter that to ask what you consider promotion, because Connect NC seems to be under the impression that if you don't use the terms vote for the bond, then it's not promotion. However, here's one example of our state government spending money on advocating the fact that there is a bond, basically. The North Carolina State Budget Office completely remodeled their website. The government website where we are to go to find financial information about our state was remodeled in October of last year. Now it looks like a campaign website, and the front banner shows you information about Connect NC. Actually, earlier today, I saw on the North Carolina's National Guard site, and that's a separate issue, but their Facebook page, they're giving information about Connect NC and how much it's going to benefit them. Now, they were asked, how are you able to promote this bond through your official outlets? And they said, we're not promoting it or taking a stand. We are just giving information. So I believe that state funds, they have a government website, I believe that is being used to advocate for the bond. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bowles. I believe this next one's directed to Mr. Hebb. College is very expensive. Where's the money going if not in part for infrastructure? I have no kids. I'm tired of being taxed to pay for other people's kids, especially at the college level.
Good question.
Oh, well, that's for me. The infrastructure component of higher education spending is only a portion of the budget. Now, I can't speak to tuition rate issues. That is a much grander problem. What I can speak to is the fact that the infrastructural needs at the university system, the community colleges, are funded by the state. Tuition only pays for a portion of that, and actually that's still the case even with or without the bond. I mean, the state government pays for structures at your colleges. That is a part of what we do as taxpayers, is we support educational infrastructure in our state. I would argue that things like nurses and doctors and engineers come from our schools, and that's why every taxpayer does pay into education. I think you guys are all talking about a 50-cent sales tax for education in your county. I mean, these are things that we do. As far as why tuition can't cover it, tuition only covers a portion of the necessary expenditures for a university's operations. I think part of the reason for that is that there is an attempt to keep tuition under control, which is obviously rising rapidly. But the bond, as far as tuition is concerned, are not very closely connected, except for the fact that this is to build more infrastructure more quickly so that hopefully we can take some of the pressure off of the university and college budgets as it relates to tuition.
Thank you, Ms. Rebels. 1-minute response.
Well, I would question whether tuition rates will continue to increase with the upkeep on the new infrastructure, but I think a more important question is the necessity of the new infrastructure within the university system. And in fact, there was an article that came out earlier this week by Representative Mark Brody in which it was disclosed, and the article is titled, "What is the university system hiding on Connect NC bond?" And it was disclosed within his article that in 2015, legislators in their budget, they enacted a provision that the university system was going to have to file a report to demonstrate the necessity of these infrastructure projects. That report was due on February 1st. To date, that report has not been submitted by the university system. Mr. Brody asked when they intend to submit this report. Voters need to know this information. Are these buildings justified? He was told it would be at least April before the report would be submitted after the vote has already occurred.
Thank you. This next question is directed to Mr. Zumwalt. All right, Mr. Bowles, this next question is for you. 2 minutes with a 1-minute response by your opponent. Mr. Bowles, you've been a strong supporter of the San Marcan Training Center, and as a result, the Connect NC bond issue includes several $1 million for San Marcan. But wouldn't it be better for the General Assembly to find money in existing revenue streams for this, rather than state borrowing more than $2 billion? In other words, isn't it a more typically Republican, quote-unquote, idea to avoid borrowing unless absolutely necessary?
If the bond doesn't pass, that's what I'm going for, is the $8.5 million out of general funds. Does that mean that that means we have to take it from somewhere else? Does that mean we take it from our state employees or from other critical services that we provide? San Marcan is a law enforcement training center out here at 420 acres in the western part of North Carolina. Folks, North Carolina had never had a designated training center for law enforcement officers in the state of North Carolina and correctional officers. Department of Public Safety employs over 25,000 employees. Before this training center was in place with our correctional officers, we were hiring a correctional officer for $28,000, putting them in an adult prison system with no training. He would stay in that training in that prison for 6 months before we would take him out and find a community college or a strip mall building that we could bring 20 or 30 together and have a class. By that time, 6 months later, we were having a 50 to 60% turnover rate with our adult correctional officers. Does anybody remember the assistant district attorney in Wake Forest, and her father was kidnapped about 2 years ago in Raleigh? When they arrested that gang member, went in his cell, there were 10 cell phones in his cell with chargers. They were getting $5,000 to $10,000 per phone to be snuck in because the correctional officers, we had not trained them properly. Folks, it is an important, critical issue, especially with our state safety, that this training facility is to be built here. Thank you.
Mr. Zumwalt, without addressing how they snuck in those phones, what is your 1-minute response?
Well, it's going to be tough to do this in 1 minute. We have the North Carolina Justice Academy. I hope you look that up. I hope you'll remember it. The North Carolina Justice Academy. There's at least one man here who's taught at that academy before. So this is not the only place in North Carolina, and it's not even, there are several actually. Second thing is that this has cost $8 million so far. The article in the pilot, again, I hope you look it up because I speak only in facts, said, and had Mr. Bowles' picture in the front, and they're very proud, that after $8 million renovation, according to the pilot, they now had 4 classrooms. Now when they spend another $8.5 million, according to Mr. Hebb, we'll have a facility for training corrections officers. I can find you classrooms in our community college. If you need to train right here, train somewhere. We need money here. If you can get $16.5 million for that, why can't we get some money for our schools?
Question for Mr. Head. And you heard the two candidates discuss a particular item that was included, or that's proposed to be included in the bond issue. It appears that many of the items in the bond issue are items that would normally be paid in a budget bill. Why are they included in a bond issue?
Absolutely. Well, the budget in this state is capped at $21.3 billion. There's only so much money that can go around to do different infrastructural projects. The idea behind passing a bond is so that you can do a great number of infrastructural projects right now instead of waiting on them. And the way that our budget is fixed, and one thing I would like to compliment our current legislature on is the fact that they have balanced our budget. They even put away money in a rainy day fund. And that's something that we cannot ignore. But the only way that they've been able to do that is through smart stewardship of our funds. And that $21.3 billion can only go so far. The $2 billion in infrastructural projects that are in the bond are things that we can invest in now so that we can gain the benefits of them while continuing to have a budget that is easily balanced by having debt service that is built into the budget that we're currently paying now. And the reason that the legislature came up with this, and I hope I'm speaking properly on it, is so that there was the ability to predictably fund these projects so that there was a large-scale benefit now and we had predictable payoff going forward into the future. Can some of these projects get paid other methods? Absolutely. Can all of them, especially in the time frame that they're needed? No. And that's something that we have to consider when we make a choice on a bond. And one of the things I would like to point out is the legislature also, you've had previous legislatures in this state that have just borrowed money without asking. This legislature is asking your opinion on this bond, and that's why you have a right to vote on it.
Thank you, Ms. Rebels. 1 minute response.
Well, I would note that the legislature is actually required to ask the voters for approval by our state constitution because the debt is so large that they're asking to acquire. However, in response to that question, I think that a lot of these projects that are included within the bond that would normally be funded by other avenues were included in order to gain support from a broad range of areas because your local representative tells you we need this project for our area, so go ahead and pass this statewide $2 billion bond. That's one of the reasons that I call these pork projects. Now, the Representative Bowles stated, he asked, if not funded by this bond, where are they going to get the money? What else are they going to pull from the budget in order to fund this project? And I would say that funding it by debt, you're taking money away from future priorities. That's not fair to future generations. I say take it from the debt service that we're going to save ourselves and fund those projects.
Question from Mr. Hebb. I don't know if you'll need the full 2 minutes. Earlier you said that the state was not spending anything to promote the Connect NC bond. So those flyers were printed for free?
If you're referencing these are paid from the committee. There is a committee that is favoring the bond. That's who I'm with, and that's why I'm here, and that's who I work for. They pay for these brochures. These are private donations that are here to pay in favor of the bond, okay? As far as state resources in favor of the bond, there are none, and like I stated, there are state agencies that it is their responsibility to inform the public of things such as bonds, and they are going to give informational data out there, and I would suspect that there are resources expended at informing the public of the existence of a bond. But as far as stuff that's favoring, yes, I have plenty of brochures, and you can have some if you'd like at the end. But they're paid for by private donations, and they come from all over the state, from a variety of different folks. Various alumni associations, private citizens, foundations for universities. I mean, there's a wide variety of donors.
Thank you. Ms. Rebels, your response, 1 minute.
Well, it's a blurry line in some of the instances. For example, the community colleges, the statewide community college board asked them to donate $1,000 for every $1 million that they would receive if the bond passes. And many of the community colleges have donated to the Connect NC fund. And so you can say that's not coming from their tax dollars, maybe it's coming from a foundation fund or something, but Would they be otherwise using that money in place of where tax dollars would go? I don't know. I think there are many areas that's blurry, but I want to point out, it sounds good to say we're going to be funding water and sewer projects, or we're going to be funding agriculture with this bond. 16% of this bond is a line item for water and sewer, actually $309 million rather. There is not one single specific water and sewer project within this bond. That money is going into a fund, and they will decide later, after it's passed, where it goes. With that reallocation provision, I think we need to be skeptical of that. There's little scrutiny and little accountability in regard to this bond. Many different areas I could go on and on, but I know I'm limited.
Thank you. For the county commission. All right, let's move to closing statements. We're going to go in reverse order from the order in which we started. Each candidate will receive 2 minutes. Ms. Rebels, 2 minutes for your closing statement.
Hey, please visit the website againstthebond.com, and if anybody agrees with me, then you're welcome to donate to our cause. I am not paid to be here, and it's difficult for me to compete with the millions of dollars that have been raised by Connect NC. I ask that you all vote against this bond on March 15th and tell your friends to vote against. It's an omnibus debt bill for items that should be considered individually and funded based on their own merits during the budget adoption process. The taxpayers of North Carolina are going to be forced to pay back that $2 billion, whether it's by a tax increase or by taking away money from other future priorities for these projects today. This bond is wrapped in deception. There's an agriculture line item, 9%. There's no agriculture funding. That money is going to build new buildings at NC State University campus. That's more UNC system funding. Their Connect NC, the bulk of their mailers that I've seen say, keep North Carolina safe, support the National Guard by passing this bond. The National Guard funding for new buildings is the smallest portion of the entire bond, yet it's being used for the marketing for all the whole thing. The National Guard and other entities are being used as puppets in order to attempt to push the passage of this bond, even though they're getting the smallest portion of funding. And I personally am offended that if National Guard money, if that is truly necessary to keep us safe, then I'm offended that that funding is being held hostage, contingent upon the passage of money for hundreds of millions of dollars for parks and zoos and other projects that we do not even know about because it is not outlined within the legislation. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, 2 minutes for your closing statement.
First things first, I'd like to thank everybody here for having me. One of the other hats I wear is the chairman of the North Carolina Young Republicans. And one of the reasons that I thought about this bond a great deal before I supported it was because of the needs that are present in North Carolina. The funding for the National Guard, just an example, one of the members of our committee is former Brigadier General David Jeanette, who was in charge of the National Guard, and he supports this bond because he does see the need for National Guard funding. The zoo could lose accreditation if it doesn't get this money. I could go on and on. The water and sewer projects are going to be spread throughout the entire state. That's why there's actually a process that's going to be utilized to choose where that funding goes. It's going to be based on need. And the reason that there's not line items is so that there's the ability for us to, different communities to apply for it. But I would say that it's worth remembering that Governor McCrory, Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest, Speaker Moore, Senator Tillman, Representative Bowles, and Representative McNeil all support this bond, and I do too. And I hope you'll take a look at our website, voteyes2invest.com. I have literature, and I'll be around for any questions you have afterwards. I appreciate your consideration. Thank you again for having me.